Fair Play, a novel by Pete Fisher. Chapter 33. On the Road. Martin could not wait to get out of that bloody classroom. He hurried down 2 flights of stairs into the entrance hall and walked out through the automatic doors into the sunshine. He stood briefly and looked back at the ugly, sprawling modern office complex. He put down his teacher's briefcase, took off his tie, unbuttoned his shirt a little and walked over to the car. He rolled a cigarette and sat down on the curb to smoke it. It was the end of March. The weather had got warm again at last, and the birds were singing in the afternoon sunshine. He wouldn't be coming back here, ever. Not if he could help it. A pretty dark-haired young lady in a business suit came running out of the building and across the car park. She rushed over and sat down next to Martin excitedly. A little out of breath, she fished in her bag for her cigarettes. She lit one up and exhaled. "God, you lucky bastard! So you're finished teaching these wankers?" Martin chuckled and greeted his favourite girl. "Hey, Sue. Too right I have. Thank fuck for that. Geez, I envy you so much. This place really gets me down. The students are so smarmy. You should start your own school. Then you can teach people your way." Sue laughed. She had a burning question. "So you giving up teaching for good?" "Well, we're booked up almost up to the end of the year. No real gap, so that's it for this year. Probably have to teach again after that." "You lucky sod. I wish I could do something else. This job is killing me." There are a lot worse jobs though. Believe me, I've done them." "Yeah, now you'll be travelling round and having all those women chasing you, won't you?" Martin laughed and put out his cigarette. "I don't know about that, Sue. No idea what it's going to be like. All I know is I've got to learn about 20 new songs by next week, and I'll be sleeping in a tour bus for the next month. Can I come with you?" Martin laughed again. "I wish you could, darling. That would be such a laugh." He was really going to miss her. She kept him sane. They'd been out for a drink most weeks and often had coffee or lunch together. Martin had really had to hold himself back. He tried desperately not to fall in love with her, but she was so sweet and so pretty. He was forced to leave her behind now. "I'll call you when we have a day off in a hotel." "Bet you don't." Martin and Sue hugged. He noticed that her eyes had moistened. "Take care, Sue. Give me an autograph before you go." Sue walked off to get her tram. She turned round and waved, struggling to smile. Martin watched yet another beautiful woman walk out of his life. The new freeloaders were based way out east in Leipzig. Martin was booked into a hotel there for 5 days of rehearsals. He slept deeply after the long drive. That first morning, Martin awoke and realised with great pleasure that breakfast awaited him. He was unused to this luxury. Around 10, he gathered his guitars and went out to the car. After about 15 minutes' drive, he found the rehearsal room. It was nestling secretly at the end of an impossibly narrow old alleyway. Martin reversed the rental car carefully up to the door and unloaded his gear. The new band were a tight-knit team. Martin was a bit nervous about fitting in. Sven played guitar. Very accomplished player, but rather earnest. Andy played bass. Local boy, also a blues fan. Mark drummed. Canny Berliner with a mop of curly hair. Paul played keyboards. Local boy, also a techno fan. Anna played saxophone, pure Swedish sassy, shoulder-length brown hair, slim figure and deep blue eyes, loudest and dirtiest laugh of them all, and she could blow the most amazing sax. Rollo played percussion. He looked pretty unconventional, dreadlock in a turban. His third-floor hotel room window overlooked the street below. Martin watched as an enormous white double-decker bus pulled up outside the hotel entrance. It blocks out the view for the entire ground and first floors. He went down to join the rest of the band. Martin added his contribution to the mountain of baggage that was clogging the reception area. There was just time to grab a last coffee at the bar. The tour bus, or nightliner, slept 16 people on its upper deck. 4 up, 4 down, on either side of a narrow gangway. Martin bagged the upper bunk at the very back. It was the quickest to get to and escape from, being right next to the stairs. You had to be extra careful not to fall down them, though, when you got out of bed, or when the bus was swaying unduly in a crosswind or on a bumpy autobahn. Then it felt like being on a ship at sea upstairs. Getting dressed or undressed could be a tricky business, especially when the sailor was drunk. 2 nights in the bus. So far, so good. Time for breakfast. Martin got up, pulled on his jeans and went downstairs. The bus was parked at the rear stage entrance. Everyone was gathered around the bar at the back of the hall. On a big trestle table, the staff had laid out an excellent breakfast buffet. They were a team of friendly South Americans. One of them manned a big coffee machine behind the bar. It produced a wickedly fragrant brew of freshly ground Colombian beans. Martin settled on a bar stool and enjoyed his special roast. There was bread, croissant, rolls, butter, jam, cheeses, cold meats, boiled eggs, a veritable feast, 5 stars. Martin really needed a shower. He just hoped it was better than the grubby, lukewarm experience in the first club. It was. The shower bathroom had a large raised marble platform in the middle. Set into it was a bathtub large enough for 4 people. Suspended over that was a huge circular brass shower head. Standing under it was like being in a warm tropical rainstorm. It was so good, Martin went back for another one after the show. The show itself was a real cracker, almost literally. The lighting tech had fun with the in-house flamethrower. It spewed out real flames from above the stage during the last number. The crowd stood looking up at them, yelling and screaming with delight, their hands held high in the air. It was always busy in Karlsruhe shopping precinct on a Saturday afternoon. Crowds of shoppers jostled together, eager to fill the fridge or spend all their money on clothes. Paradise for pickpockets. It was also known to be a place where you could pick up something to smoke, snort or swallow, usually from a hoodie-clad youth down a side street. That afternoon, Kriminalpolizei-Hauptmeisterin Julia Schmidt and her boss Hauptkommissar Andreas Hoffmann were dressed casually in t-shirts, jeans and sneakers. They hoped to blend in while keeping an eagle eye out for likely offenders. They'd just strolled the length of the precinct and back for the umpteenth time. No joy. They paused on a side street corner. Julia lit up a cigarette to look even more casual. Andreas spotted 2 men emerging from the clothing chain outlet. One of them had what at a distance looked like some very unusual headgear. The men walked towards the detectives. Andreas whispered, hat ein Turban. Hat bestimmt was dabei." As they almost drew level, Andreas challenged them. He held up his police ID card. Polizei, Ausweis bitte? Wir haben nichts dabei. Rollo was telling the truth. They weren't carrying. Andreas wasn't having it. Ihr kommt mit. Julia took Mac by the arm and Andreas grabbed Rollo. At the police station, they were asked to empty their pockets and their rucksacks and take their shoes off. Andreas grimaced and asked Rollo to put them back on. The suspects were in possession of several pairs of men's underpants, 10 pairs of socks, shampoo, toothpaste and shower gel, all with receipts. Rollo's weed was under his bunk mattress. Marcus, the tour manager's mobile, rang in the bus, just as he was winning at Grand Theft Auto. Okay. He promptly swore and threw the phone down. Das ist ein verdammter Idiot. He had to go down to the police station to vouch for them. 20 minutes later, Julia and Andreas brought them back to the bus. The bus door was open. Mac swiftly boarded and pressed the button. The door hissed shut. Marcus positioned himself right in front of it. He puffed out his chest. Then he folded his tattooed arms and splayed his legs slightly. Keiner kommt hier rein. Nicht ohne Durchsuchungsbefehl. No way they were coming in. Technically, they needed a warrant. Legally speaking, the bus was a domicile. It was unlikely they'd get a warrant at the weekend. Andreas protested. Marcus stood firm. He knew a bust could jeopardize the whole tour. In the end, Andreas and Julia gave up. They got back into their car. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Rollo was the most relieved. He'd stashed 50 grams of finest Jamaican bush. Business as usual. The rain was dripping into the little backstage marquee. Everyone's shoes were caked in mud. It was a long way from Woodstock. Just a small weekend open-air event in the woods of deepest Bavaria. A couple of thousand people had just braved a torrential downpour to witness the freeloaders and Frankie close the day. Martin was enjoying a well-earned beer at the bar, chatting to Andy. A young lady wandered into the tent wearing very muddy Wellington boots. Her hair was dripping and she was soaked to the skin. She came straight up to Martin. Darf ich einfach hier rumhängen? Draußen schifft es noch. Martin didn't mind her hanging out with him at all. She was way too young, but nice to talk to. She was probably 20-ish. She was a little shorter than him and very pretty. Pageboy cut fair hair, t-shirt and shorts, and of course the irresistible wellies. He gave her a clean dry towel from the pile in the corner and got her a beer. He also rolled her a cigarette. Hers were all wet. Her name was Paula. She was pretty drunk. They got on like a house on fire. Marcus came into the tent, clutching his mobile. Leute, hört mal zu! Ihr seid morgen bei Top of the Pops. They were on telly. Tomorrow. Martin threw his beer in the air and hugged Paula. She was a little bewildered, but it was true. Thursday night was Top of the Pops, the next day. Anna went wild, screaming with laughter and dancing in circles with Andy. Paul, Sven and Mark toasted the occasion with fresh beer, having also thrown theirs up to the leaky roof. Martin suggested they all celebrate with something stronger. He fetched a surplus bottle of grappa from the bus. The freeloaders all got shots, Paula included. The tent gradually emptied. The bus was due to leave. Martin hugged Pola. He gave her a kiss on her pretty cheek. She said she'd be watching. The nightliner pulled up the next morning at the back of a modern office building in the industrial belt on the outskirts of Cologne. A huge blue unicorn pranced on a white pedestal on the rooftop above the front entrance, as if it was boxing at the sky. In what seemed like a previous life, Martin had seen it every day from the tram on the way to work. He half expected a rainbow to appear. Inside, the studio looked exactly like the English version of Top of the Pops. Frankie had insisted they play live. Martin had to show the inexperienced studio tech where to put the mic for his speaker cab. The studio crew covered their ears as the freeloaders sound-checked. The band were asked to turn it down a bit. Martin nodded, but left his amp up high. They had several camera run-throughs. Afterwards, Martin stood on the stage under the heat of the TV studio lights and retuned his guitar. He hoped it wouldn't get any hotter. Martin didn't actually have to put on makeup. The makeup lady had other ideas, however. While Martin sat nervously in front of the illuminated mirror, she reached for the pink foundation. He leant away instinctively and told her firmly none of that. She grabbed the big fluffy brush and the powder. Realizing it was no use resisting, he allowed her to dab his forehead and cheeks generously. It gave him a slightly ghostly appearance, better than being shiny. Thankfully, she decided to leave his long hair tied back as it was. The band and Frankie were crammed into the little dressing room. They laughed at each other's paint and powder. They all had uniform beige shirts. The nice wardrobe lady had ironed them. Martin had matching hat and trousers, having been beige on stage for quite a while now. It was late afternoon now. Martin was thirsty. He was horrified to discover there wasn't a beer in sight. The fridge contained only harmless soft drinks. The TV lady said after the show. A lady with headset and bare media midriff put her head round the door. She said it was showtime. The freeloaders filed into the main studio and took up position on one of 3 stages. The crowd were, as always, invited. Surprisingly, only about 50 or 60 young people. They were being brought up to operating temperature by the warm-up guy. He was teaching them his hand signal prompts. On his command, they would either applaud, cheer, wave, or jump. Not unlike performing seals. The show's male presenter sported one of the heavily gelled coiffures of the day. It looked like his hairstylist had poured wallpaper paste all over his head, mussed up his hair and run away. The makeup lady had given him several coats, somewhere between a medium-rare steak and a pink birthday cake. The little red lights on the cameras indicated that it was time to roll. The female presenter's link was that everyone had caught the reggae virus. The band were cued as she announced them. Meine Damen und Herren, mit ihrem aktuellen Single, Frankie and the Freeloaders. Cue applause and enthusiastic cheering. Martin and the band clicked into the song with practiced ease, but giving it a few extra drops of Tabasco. After the second chorus, Martin got his 20 seconds of fame. Frankie did the honours. Mr. Martin Dalgleish. Martin turned up his Gibson, put the Marshall into overdrive and unleashed his fiery melodic solo. Martin liked bringing the blues to reggae. The heat shimmered over a dry and dusty deserted field in a wide river valley. It was flanked by huge rocky mountains. They would have been snow-covered in winter, stretching far into the distance under the clear blue sky. It was a baking August morning in the Swiss Alps. Martin was standing about 100 metres away from a gigantic open-air festival stage at the foot of a steep tree-covered slope. Lined up on stage across its breadth between the PA stacks were around 6 vintage Marshall amps on top of 12 battered Marshall speaker cabs. In the middle, on a riser, was a mighty silver double bass drum kit. Its dozen tom-toms were topped by an impressive circular array of cymbals that sparkled in the sunlight. Martin listened in wonder and admiration to the outrageously loud and raucous guitar sound. He wished he could let rip like that occasionally. The freeloaders were a kind of reggae sorbet in between the rockier items on the menu that day. Motorhead were the main course. While Frankie announced the next song, Martin crouched down and grabbed a quick drink of water. He looked out over the crowd in the late afternoon sun. They were real rockers. They'd been jumping and cheering for the freeloaders all the time. There were quite a few crowd surfers too. Martin always walked forward to the lip of the stage now for his solo. He could have put his foot on the monitor that day. Backstage afterwards, he spotted a small figure with a woolly hat approaching from a neighbouring cabin. He walked past Martin's table and headed towards the stage. He turned briefly, giving a friendly nod. "Nice guitar, mate, yeah. The guitar guy from the hard rock headliners." Martin was the first one up in the bus that freezing cold November morning. He went downstairs, leaving the choir of snoring behind. He stood swaying slightly at the coffee machine. He made himself and driver Johnny a much-needed brew. Then he dozed off again in the lounge for an hour. Martin awoke to see the outskirts of Hamburg. Johnny provided the geography. "Wir sind jetzt in St. Pauli. Red lights." St. Pauli was sleeping at 8 a.m. They were booked to play at the Große Freiheit 36, smack in the middle of the Reeperbahn. The Kaiserkeller, where the Beatles played, was right underneath it. The caretaker took Martin down to the basement for a coffee and showed him the legendary club. There wasn't much to see now. Neatly stacked bar stools and a modern mirrored bar. Martin tried to imagine the Beatles playing 6 hours a night there, all fired up on beer and preludin. Martin could have done with some that night. The show stretched to almost 2.5 hours. The atmosphere in the club was charged with expectation. It was full to the brim with around 1,500 people. The wooden-fronted balconies all round looked like they'd spill over. Martin watched fascinated as a young black guy with locks danced frenetically, non-stop, right up against the stage. He even danced in between the songs. About halfway through, he took his bag and emptied the contents onto the lip of the stage. He proceeded to roll one of the biggest, fattest joints Martin had seen since that cone in Zurich. He left a sizable pile of weed just lying on the stage. He started dancing again, sending up intermittent clouds of fragrant smoke signals.